Hi everyone, and welcome to PaintyDecks, where I transform common Pokemon cards into full arts. Today we will not be working on the Vaporeon, seeing as it's already done, but we will be working on its pre-evolution, which is Eevee of course. Eevee is one of my favorite Pokemon. I know it might be a little basic, but I just love the design that sits somewhere between a puppy and a kitten. And of course I love the range of evolution it provides. Because of this, I have painted my fair share of Eevees and evolutions in the past. This Jolteon was my first ever holo card. I love how the lightning turned out, even though the environment itself is pretty simple. Even though I don't feel like I have a favorite evolution, it seems to be Leafeon. I've painted 3 of them so far, and my favorite is this Japanese promo. I was very intimidated by painting the pond, but I think it turned out pretty nice. I think this Eevee will be a great addition to the set, don't you? Let's start painting him. And by that, of course, I mean, let's start with the concept. We're not getting our paints out just yet. If you know me from my streams or other social media, you'll know that I generally don't plan out my cards. For commissions, I will incorporate the wishes of my client, but I generally just go with the flow. Since this is my first YouTube video and all, I decided to go all in and prepare myself a little better this time. So I prepared 3 thumbnail sketches. Thumbnails are very loose sketches just to explore ideas quickly. I didn't put much time into them, that's why they're looking a little rough. As you can see, one of them is not quite like the others. I decided to push myself a little and maybe add another Pokemon into the card, and then posted them to my story to let y'all vote for which one you like best. Almost 900 people voted, which is so crazy to see. In the end, of course, the most complex one with Vaporeon won. I have conflicting feelings about this, to be honest, but I think it will be a good challenge. Next, I prepared 2 sketches that were slightly more detailed, combining the background of one with Vaporeon. For these versions, I let my lovely Buy Me a Coffee supporters vote, and funnily enough, version 1 got all of the votes. I do think it flows a little better than the other one. With the sketch decided and done, it's now actually time to get painting. For painting, I use regular acrylics. I get a lot of questions about brushes and paint, but truth be told, I just use any brushes I can find and paint from the hardware store. So here's how I go about painting cards. For me, cards are kind of divided into 2 sections, the top part and the bottom part. First, I'll put down a base layer of paint over everything to gauge what my colors will look like, and then I'll start with the top part. I get a lot of questions about base coats for my cards, and the truth is, as you can see here, that I don't use any. I've tried stuff like gesso and acrylic base coats before, but they never really worked well for me. Whether you need a base coat also heavily depends on what paints you're using. Luckily, I found a brand that makes very opaque paints, so generally I don't need a base coat for opacity reasons. For me, just going at it on the card works best. The reason that I start with the top of the card is that it's the easiest, and because of that, it gives me a good feeling of what painting will be like for the rest of the card. Unlike the bottom portion, the space here is very limited. This means I don't really have to come up with a whole lot of new ideas or details, I can just work off of what I already see. It's very relaxing. I don't really have to struggle to match the style of the original card, since I have all the references I could need right there. It's mostly just about extending existing elements. That's actually why I paint some cards just as halves. It's very quick, very relaxing, and a good way to ensure that I don't burn out by working on too many complex cards. For this Eevee, the top part is pretty simple. A lot of it is just this beautiful purpley pinkish sky and then some water. Nothing too crazy. However, you might notice that I'm still struggling with the sky portion. I have sort of a love-hate relationship with painting skies. They're simple shape-wise, very organic, not a lot going on, and that means you can paint them pretty freely. It's pretty much the exact opposite of something like architecture, where you have to be extremely precise. On the other hand, color matching and gradients make them really tricky. Since the sky is usually either a solid color or a gradient from one solid color into the next, my color matching has to be pretty much on point for it to look nice, and any mistakes are really noticeable. You can see in my footage that I'm struggling to produce a nice gradient. I don't know how other artists do it, but I can never seem to get my gradient to look nice in these small spaces. Somehow, it always comes out patchy and uneven. If you have any tips for that, leave them in the comments down below. Even with my struggles, I have to say though, I'm pretty happy with how the sky turned out. I think the clouds played a huge part in making it look more cohesive. I'm very much into stereotypically girly things, so I appreciate that the entire sky and background is kind of pink toned. With the sky done, we can move on to the water. I love cards that are split like this, where you can see both under and above the water. I've painted 2 of them so far, and it's been fun every time. Although it is a little challenging to paint the different lighting styles of air and water. I remember struggling a lot with this Vaporeon. It was hard for me to capture the foresty river vibe in the water. For this card, everything went really smoothly, but to be fair, I only had to paint a few centimeters of card for the water, so there wasn't a whole lot of space to mess up anyways. The top part is done. What do you think so far? Let me know in the comments down below. If you like this video so far, leave a like and consider subscribing or following me on other social media for more Pokemon card paintings. This stage of the card is so funny. It's definitely an ugly duckling right now, but let's transform it into a beautiful swan by getting into the meat and potatoes of it. I'm starting by creating a cohesive background color. Since this is an underwater scene, it also has a lot of gradients, much like the sky. Can you tell that I probably should have chosen a different card to use in my first video? This is just full of gradients. Although, since this is a larger space, the gradient is not that bad. I can use a bigger brush and more water to blend things on this scale, and it's much more forgiving. I'm not sure if you can see it on the video, but I used so much water that the card actually ended up warping. It's okay though, I will just let it sit in a book later on to flatten it out. As long as the water doesn't soak into the card at the edges, it should be fine. I'm trying to keep the composition in the card in mind and create a lighter center with darker edges to frame the shot nicely. I'm of course planning on adding the Vaporeon in the foreground here, so I'm trying to keep the background in this area lighter to create nice contrast. It doesn't actually end up working out all that well, but that was the idea anyway. Now it's time to add some details. I'm not entirely sure what this was meant to be in the original, but I'm turning it into a rock or underwater reef. Right now it looks a little off with it being so dark and all, but with everything else added, it will look good, I promise. Now I'm moving on to the, I don't actually know what they are. Some type of coral? I tried googling it, but I actually couldn't find out what they are. So if any of y'all know, let me know in the comments. Color matching these was easier than expected. I thought I would struggle more with the blue and purple hues, but I think I was able to match them pretty well. I'm now kind of deviating from my concept. In my original sketch there was a big coral thingy in the foreground, but since I already want to add Vaporeon, I think it might get a little too busy if I also add the coral. So all I'm really doing here is adding small details that aren't too distracting. So this is where we are now, with the bottom finished. I have to say, looking at this in retrospect, I love how this looks, and I kind of wish that I hadn't added the Vaporeon. While this is a little bit empty and simple, I think it matched the style of the original card nicely and it looks really cool, but you live and you learn. So let's get ready to paint Vaporeon. As I've said before, I'm generally kind of hesitant to put other Pokemon into my cards. I've only done it a handful of times before, with varying degrees of success. The first was actually adding a Krabby for commission, and I was extremely nervous whether the recipient would like it. I think it's not perfect, but it turned out nice enough and blends somewhat nicely with the rest of the card. On this Raichu, I think I missed the mark a little. Pikachu is just too overpowering and kind of looks like it was stickered onto the card. I had given it a white outline to show its electricity, but it just ended up looking like I stuck a Pikachu sticker onto a card. This Snom and Seal are my most recent ones, and I also think the best so far. The cards themselves are pretty simple, but I'm very pleased with how the painted Pokemon integrate into the bigger picture. If you have a keen eye, you may have picked up on a little problem with my original Vaporeon sketch. It is much too small. According to the Pokédex, Vaporeon stands at 1 meter tall, and Eevee is only about 30 centimeters. This means my earlier sketches are way out of proportion. So I made a new one that I still wasn't happy with. And after collecting some feedback, I made another one. This time I just used pencil and paper. And honestly, this is the first one that I'm actually pretty happy with. It looks much more dynamic and natural than all of the other ones. I'm really glad I took my time with this and reworked it. So let's actually start painting this Vaporeon. I generally try to not sketch directly onto the painted card. That's because if I mess up and I have to erase something, I run the risk of damaging or smudging the paint below. That's why I use a technique that I first learned about in portraiture. I have the sketch of Vaporeon cut out here. It's already the correct size for the card. Now, I'll cover the back in soft pastels that are a similar color to the background. As you can see, I filmed this once before, but the chalk was too light to actually show up on the card. I can now put the Vaporeon sketch onto the card and trace over it using a pen or pencil. The pressure will cause the sketch to be traced directly onto the card. On a small scale like this, it doesn't work perfectly, but it does give me an idea for where to place all the body parts. Now, it's just a matter of filling in Vaporeon according to my digital sketch. This was pretty nerve-wracking since I was already really happy with the card and was very much afraid to mess it up. I started with a base coat and slowly built up the colors from there. This is kind of where I noticed that Vaporeon maybe wasn't the best choice. When looking at references, Vaporeon pretty much has the same color as everything else in this underwater scene. This makes it stand out less against the rest and makes the card feel a little bit unbalanced. Regardless, I'm happy that I tried it and definitely learned some new things. Now that most of Vaporeon is done, all that is left is adding some outlines and details in pencil. Then we're ready to move on to the very last step. To protect my cards from scratches and paint rubbing off, I always seal them with a clear layer of glossy varnish. It also adds a beautiful shine to it that makes the whole thing look nice and cohesive. There are different types of varnishes, but I've found that the spray-on one just works best for me. Before you use it, make sure to test your varnish on a test card. Some of them get sticky or even change your paints, and then all of your hard work color matching will go to waste. Don't ask me how I know. If you do use spray-on varnish, make sure to do it outside or in another well-ventilated area according to manufacturer directions. Also make sure you let your card dry fully before handling it and keep it away from curious cats. Again, don't ask me how I know. With the card painted, the varnish fully dry, and the card pressed flat, it is now time for the final reveal. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed seeing my process. If you want to see more of my stuff, check out my other socials or drop by my Twitch stream every Tuesday, Friday, and Sunday. A special thanks goes out to my Buy Me a Coffee supporters, without whom I literally would not have been able to make this video. See you in the next one, bye bye!